Hi, this is Michael Breen, and I'm talking to you participants. The material that's on the CD is not intended to give you more content than you've had already, but essentially to act as a refresher, something to just tickle the dendrites a bit, to remind you about some of the themes, because if we make only one change in how we go about things, I would suggest that to change your approach, your response or reaction, will have one of the highest payoffs learning in terms of your ability to learn quickly and easily than any other factor. You're asked to do something that you haven't done before, or it's maybe something that you have done before, but for some people that thought of going on to the Big Dipper and the feelings of being out of control, you're taking the ride, that the ride is taking you, and that you're going to be moved up, moved down. Nowadays it's swung round upside down in circles, is really appealing. But for other people, it's just the worst sensation in the world. What happens when your expectation is changed? What happens when you get lost? What happens when you don't know how to proceed? I had an experience a number of years ago where I had some work with a member of the Saudi royal family, and I was taken off to Egypt. And this had been my first experience of spending any substantial amount of time with the hyper-rich. And I mean, this is beyond anything that you will have seen or experienced before. I come from a middle-class background, and this was the first time that I had been completely cut off from my cultural references, from my social references, and from class. This is a fellow, for example, who when he graduated from high school was given a yacht, a helicopter, and his own communication satellite. I'm there in Cairo, and this fellow owns one floor of the so-called World Trade Center in Cairo. 29 stories high, by the way, twin towers, and beneath us was the American Embassy, and one floor above was the CIA. And then this entire floor, which is a domestic residence. I was put into one quarter of the building, the wing of the building, if you will, where there were some guest bedrooms. And I was assigned a servant who, when I was in the building, was with me 24 hours a day. Now, I thought this was amusing at first. When we arrived, we got in. There was some time to take a shower, etc. before dinner. So I left my room, left my clothes in the room. My bags were still there in the room. Went and took a shower. And when I came back, some clothes had been taken out of my bag, pressed, and laid out onto the bed. In other words, my wardrobe had been selected for me. When I went to dinner that night and came back, I looked, and not only had my bag been unpacked, but everything had been dry cleaned. And it had been pressed. My underwear had been pressed. My socks had been pressed. All my shoes had been shined. The laces replaced if they needed replacing. It was extraordinary. I just wasn't used to that way of being treated. It was a bit of a shock, but the worst shock happened in the middle of the night. I was in a room at the end of the hall, and I woke up in the middle of the night and needed to go to the toilet. I opened the door to the room, and there was no light in the hall, and I started to walk out into the hall when I tripped over the fellow who was supposed to be watching me. This fellow was sleeping in the hallway outside my door, and he stumbled awake, and he spoke a little bit of English, and I said, I wanted to go to the toilet. I'm sorry. He said, no. He walked 2 paces ahead of me down the hall, switched the light onto the toilet, and then lifted the toilet seat lid and waited for me. So at this stage in the proceedings, I don't know what to think. Yeah, I just, what's next? So anyway, I said, thank you, that's all right, I'll take it from here. And I went to the toilet, and I flushed, and I put the lid down myself. And he looked at me kind of strangely. I wasn't playing the game properly. I had taken away his job, his task. And it took me quite a while to get used to this. I found it offensive. I was offended by this game. I wasn't used to being served, and I didn't know how to make myself servable. And so for the first few days, and having to adjust to this profound difference in approaching the life situation and life context. I had to let go of some preferences, some prejudices, in fact, because the difference here in terms of Klaus is that the servants should be invisible. They should do what they do and then get out of the way. And my preference and my tendency is to interact with everyone. That actually got in the way. So in that cultural situation, in order to be able to deal effectively and do the job I was hired to do, I had to go beyond learning my habits and preference learning. And by the way, that wasn't the end of my learning, having to go further than I'd gone before. It got more and more and more intense as I went through the week. But what we're talking about in relation to learning is that there is not one standard learning process. There isn't one way to do things. And in terms of working with the tools that we call NLP, you're going to learn a different way of thinking about learning.